This story is titled, My Parents Have Been Convincing Everyone I'm Adopted Until I Almost Believed It Myself. Though I know it's untrue. You won't believe the shocking reason behind their deception. Hey everyone, my name is Thomas, and I'm 32 years old. For most of my life, I thought my family was normal, or at least as normal as any family can be. That all changed recently, and now I feel like I'm living in some bizarre alternate reality where my own mother has decided to rewrite my entire existence. It all started a few months ago at a family gathering. My cousin, who's a few years younger than me, casually approached me with what seemed like an innocent question. "So what's it like being adopted?" he asked, completely out of nowhere. I thought he was joking at first and laughed it off. But he kept going, talking about how cool it was that my parents had taken me in and how they had only recently revealed this information to the rest of the family. I wasn't adopted, I told him firmly, starting to feel confused and a bit uneasy. He just looked at me like I was the confused one. "Dude, your mom literally said it," he replied with complete conviction. That was the moment my stomach dropped. I felt a cold wave of dread wash over me as I realized something was very wrong. As soon as the gathering ended, I drove straight home and confronted my mother immediately. "Why are you telling people I was adopted?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. "You and Dad are very much my biological parents." She barely looked up from her phone, just waved her hand at me dismissively like I was overreacting about something trivial. "Oh, don't be so dramatic," she said with an eye roll. "It was just a joke." I told her it wasn't funny. Not even close. She just rolled her eyes again and told me to relax, like I was being ridiculous for being upset. My father was sitting nearby watching TV and didn't even look up during the entire exchange. I thought that would be the end of it. Maybe she was just trying to get attention or amusing herself with some weird joke that only she found funny. But I was wrong. This was just the beginning. Soon after that initial confrontation, I started hearing about my supposed adoption from more people. My siblings thought it was hilarious. Some kind of inside joke I wasn't privy to. My younger brother even went as far as to tell me, "Well, maybe she's saying it for a reason," before smirking and walking away, leaving me even more confused and frustrated. Extended family members started bringing it up too, but in a different way. They were acting all supportive, saying things like, "It doesn't matter if you're blood or not, family is family." The weirdest part was that they genuinely believed it. This wasn't just some joke anymore. People actually thought I was adopted. The real humiliation came when a coworker mentioned it completely out of the blue. He approached my desk one morning looking slightly awkward but sincere. "Hey man, I saw your mom's Facebook post," he said. "That's really cool of them to take you in." I felt my entire body go cold. I had no idea what he was talking about, but the dread in the pit of my stomach told me it wasn't good. As soon as he walked away, I went straight to my mother's profile to see what he was referring to. And there it was. Multiple posts over the past few months about how she and my father had adopted a wonderful son. How blessed they were to have given a child in need a loving home. The posts were filled with comments from friends and distant relatives, praising her selflessness and calling her an angel for adopting me. Some were even asking for advice on adoption, and she was responding like she was some kind of expert on the subject. I stared at my computer screen in disbelief. This wasn't just a one-time joke or a passing comment anymore. My mother had created an entire fictional narrative about my life and was broadcasting it to everyone she knew. And people were believing her? Strangers were learning about my adoption before I'd even heard of it myself. I couldn't understand why she would do this. What could she possibly gain from telling everyone I was adopted when I wasn't? It didn't make any sense, and the fact that she was so dismissive when I confronted her about it only made it more confusing. I sat there for a long time, wondering what to do next. Should I comment on her posts and call her out publicly? Should I confront her again in person? Or should I just ignore it and hope it would eventually blow over? Whatever I decided, I knew one thing for certain. Something wasn't right with my mother, and I needed to figure out what was really going on. As this bizarre situation with my mother continued, I found myself developing an unexpected connection with Greg, my biological father. Despite the strange circumstances of our meeting, he continued to be supportive throughout this whole ordeal. He never pressured me or made demands. He was simply there, a steady presence when I needed someone to talk to. I could tell he was still adjusting to the idea of having a son he never knew existed. It couldn't have been easy for him either, discovering after all these years that he had a child who had been kept from him. But despite his own complicated feelings, he made it clear that I wasn't alone in this. Then something happened that I never expected. My father, the man who had raised me, told me something that caught me completely off guard. He said he was proud of me, proud that I had broken the cycle of manipulation, proud that I had stood up for myself and demanded the truth despite how difficult it was. No matter what, he told me, his voice steady and sincere, you will always be my son. That's the only thing that will never change. His words meant more to me than I could express. Despite learning that we weren't biologically related, our bond remained unbroken. If anything, it had grown stronger through this ordeal. He had raised me, been there for every important moment of my life. Biology didn't change that fundamental connection. I decided to maintain no contact with my mother. No emails, no texts, not even updates through relatives. Nothing. For the first time in my life, she was truly gone from my daily existence, and I was surprised by how liberating it felt. Therapy was working wonders for my mental health. During my sessions, I realized that thoughts of my mother didn't trigger the same intense emotions anymore. I wasn't consumed by anger. I wasn't even sad about the situation. She was just someone I used to know, a person who had shaped my life in the worst ways, but no longer had any control over me or my happiness. I focused on my well-being, setting boundaries, and, for the first time, actually sticking to them. The extended family finally stopped bringing her up in conversations with me. They knew I wouldn't entertain it anymore. She was no longer my problem, no longer a source of stress or confusion in my life. One evening, as I sat at dinner with both Greg and my father, I had a moment of clarity that washed over me unexpectedly. I realized that I didn't miss my mother. Not really. What I missed was the idea of what she could have been. The mother she should have been. But the reality was that she had never been that person, and for the first time, I was completely okay with that realization. I had lost my mother, but I had gained something far more important. The truth, a real family built on honesty rather than manipulation. And most of all, freedom from the web of lies that had entangled me for my entire life. Just when I thought things might finally be settling down, a Facebook post appeared on my feed. My mother hadn't mentioned me by name, but it was painfully obvious who she was talking about. She wrote about how someone in the family was trying to ruin their bond with nonsense and emphasized how a mother's love isn't defined by blood. The comments poured in almost immediately, full of support from people who only knew her carefully curated version of events. They called her a saint and assured her that she didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Reading through them made my stomach turn, but I forced myself to ignore it. I wasn't going to get pulled into whatever manipulative game she was playing this time. A few weeks later, I received the results from a DNA test I had ordered. I opened the envelope immediately, my heart pounding in my chest. The test confirmed something I had always believed. I was biologically related to my mother. But there was a shocking detail that didn't add up. There was no genetic match with my father. This wasn't about adoption at all. There was no lost orphanage story. Nothing like what my mother had been telling people. The truth was apparently something else entirely. Something she hadn't been willing to admit. I should have felt relief at finally having some concrete answers. But instead, I was just more confused. If I wasn't adopted, but my father wasn't my biological father, what was really going on? Why had she created this elaborate adoption lie instead of just telling the truth? I took the results straight to my mother's house. She was in the kitchen scrolling on her phone like nothing was happening in our family, like she hadn't turned my entire life upside down. I handed her the paper and waited, watching her face carefully for any reaction. She barely glanced at the test results before setting them down on the counter. Then she did something that made my blood boil. She smirked and shrugged, as if the whole thing was some minor inconvenience rather than a life-altering revelation. Then why does it bother you so much? That was all she said. No explanation, no apology, nothing. Just a smug look and a dismissive remark that completely ignored the gravity of the situation. I turned to my father, who had been standing nearby watching everything unfold. He looked like he wanted to disappear, his face pale and drawn. I asked him if he had any idea why she was doing this, why she would create this elaborate lie about adoption when the reality seemed to be something else entirely. He sighed deeply, rubbing his face with both hands in a gesture of complete exhaustion. Then he admitted something that sent chills down my spine. He was too scared to question her. Those words hung in the air between us, heavy with implications about their relationship and the dynamics that had shaped our family for decades. I didn't know what to say to that. So I left, my mind racing with more questions than answers, wondering if I would ever truly understand what was happening in my family. If I thought the DNA results would make my extended family see the truth, I was sorely mistaken. I showed the test results to my aunts and uncles, expecting them to finally understand what was happening. Their reactions were mixed and frustrating. Some of them accepted the DNA results immediately, their expressions shifting from confusion to understanding as they realized what this meant about my mother's character. But others hesitated, their loyalty to my mother overriding the clear evidence in front of them. They suggested that maybe there was more to the story than a simple test could prove. A few still insisted my mother wouldn't make something like this up for no reason, even when confronted with irrefutable scientific proof that contradicted her adoption story. One of them even had the audacity to say she wouldn't make up something like this without a good reason, as if any reason could justify the web of lies she had woven around my life. At work, things were becoming unbearable. A colleague who followed my mom on social media approached me in the break room one day, his expression a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. "Dude, your mom's saying all this stuff about adoption online. What's going on?" he asked, clearly trying to figure out who was telling the truth in this bizarre situation. I didn't even know how to respond. How could I explain that my own mother was spreading lies about me for attention without sounding like I was the unstable one? Before I could formulate an answer, something even more unsettling happened. I was at the grocery store, pushing my cart down the cereal aisle, when an older woman stopped me. She smiled warmly, her eyes crinkling at the corners with genuine emotion. "Your mother is such an inspiration," she said, catching me completely off guard. "I've read all about her adoption journey and how beautiful it was that she gave you a home." I froze, the box of cereal in my hand suddenly feeling impossibly heavy. I had never seen this woman in my life, yet she knew what my mother had been saying about me. It was in that moment that I realized just how far this had spread, beyond family, beyond acquaintances, to complete strangers who felt they knew my life story because of my mother's fabrications. When I confronted my mother about it again, she did what she always did. She turned it around on me. She told everyone that I was being ungrateful, that I was trying to embarrass her, that all she had ever done was love me, and this was how I repaid her. And the most infuriating part? People believed her. They took her word over mine, despite the evidence I had presented. The breaking point came at my cousin's wedding. I was trying to enjoy the evening, attempting to push aside all the family drama for one night. That's when I heard my mother's voice rise over the general chatter of the reception. She was loudly telling guests about how she had rescued me, spinning her adoption fantasy for yet another audience. Some people at the table nodded along like they'd already heard the story before. Something inside me snapped. I stood up and told the entire table, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, that I had taken a DNA test, that I was her biological son, and that she was lying about the whole thing. The room got awkward fast. People avoided eye contact, shifted uncomfortably in their seats, and most distressingly, no one said anything in my defense. They just acted like I hadn't spoken at all, continuing their conversations as if I hadn't just exposed a significant lie. I walked out of the reception, not caring anymore about social niceties or family obligations. I didn't want to be around people who would rather believe a ridiculous lie than acknowledge the uncomfortable truth. As I drove home that night, I started thinking that maybe the only way to move on was to cut ties completely, not just with my mother, but with anyone who enabled her behavior. Late that night, my phone buzzed with a text from my father. "I need to tell you something." Those 5 words sent a chill down my spine, and I knew instinctively that whatever he needed to say would change everything once again. I met my father late that night after his text. When I arrived at our meeting spot, I immediately noticed how exhausted he looked. There were dark circles under his eyes and a stiffness in his shoulders, like he was bracing himself for something difficult. We sat outside in his car away from the house, where no one could overhear our conversation. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he just gripped the steering wheel with both hands, staring ahead through the windshield into the darkness. The silence was heavy between us, filled with unspoken words and years of secrets. Finally, he admitted that he didn't understand why my mother was pushing the adoption story so hard. But he suspected it wasn't just about getting attention. He thought she was hiding something bigger, something that had been buried for decades. "Around the time you were conceived," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "your mother had an affair." He explained that he never had concrete proof, just suspicions that had gnawed at him for years. There had been whispers among their friends, moments where she disappeared for long stretches without explanation, and mysterious phone calls that she would abruptly end whenever he entered the room. They had fought about it back then, he told me. heated arguments that sometimes lasted through the night. But she always denied everything, insisting he was paranoid and imagining things. Over time, he let it go, choosing to believe her rather than face the alternative. Until now, when all her lies about my adoption had brought those old suspicions rushing back. It clicked instantly in my mind. She wasn't just making up a fake adoption story for sympathy and attention. She was trying to keep me from questioning my actual paternity. The adoption lie was a preemptive strike, designed to explain away any discrepancies before I even thought to look for them. I told my father that I wanted to order another DNA test, this time specifically focusing on whether he and I were actually related. He didn't fight me on it. He just nodded, still staring out the windshield like he couldn't bear to look at me, as if he already knew what the results would say. While I waited for the test results, more cracks in my mother's carefully constructed reality started appearing. One of my cousins pulled me aside at a family event, lowering his voice as he shared something he'd never told me before. "Your mother has always had a habit of making up dramatic stories for attention," he confided. "This isn't the first time she's created an entire false reality. It's just the first time it's gone this far." Then I uncovered something even more disturbing. An old charity scam she had pulled years ago. My mother had claimed to be deeply involved with a local charity, posting constantly about it on social media. She shared pictures of herself at events and repeatedly thanked people for donations, creating the impression that she was some kind of philanthropic pillar of the community. Except none of it was real. She never actually worked with the organization. She just took pictures at their public events and acted like she was part of it all to gain social media clout. When the charity eventually found out what she was doing, they publicly asked her to stop. She deleted all her posts about it and pretended the whole thing never happened, quickly moving on to her next source of attention. The more I dug into my mother's past, the more fabrications I found. It was like pulling on a loose thread and watching an entire garment unravel. Everything I thought I knew about her was being called into question. Then there was my younger brother's strange behavior. He had been unusually quiet throughout this whole ordeal, mostly just smirking whenever I tried to get answers from our mother. But one night when we were alone in the house, he muttered something that caught me off guard. "Mom always treated you differently," he said, his voice low and guarded. Before I could ask what he meant, he changed the subject and refused to say anything more about it, leaving me with yet another mysterious piece to this increasingly complicated puzzle. The paternity test results arrived a few weeks later. I opened the envelope with trembling hands, already suspecting what I would find. My father was not my biological father. The words on the paper confirmed what I had begun to fear was true, but seeing it in black and white still hit me like a physical blow. I sat there staring at the results for a long time, trying to process what this meant for my identity, for my family, for everything I thought I knew about myself. After sitting with the test results for a while, I finally decided what I needed to do. I went to my mother with the paternity test in hand. This time I wasn't asking questions or trying to understand her twisted logic. I just wanted to hear what excuse she had left now that her lies had been exposed completely. To my frustration, but not my surprise, she barely reacted to the definitive proof I placed before her. She glanced at the paper with those cold, calculating eyes, then a smirk slowly spread across her face. "Now you finally understand," was all she said, as if this revelation was somehow a victory for her rather than the exposure of her decades-long deception. I waited for her to explain further, to give me something, anything, that would make sense of all the pain and confusion she had caused. But she just shrugged, her face a mask of indifference. "I knew you'd find out eventually," she added, offering no apology, no emotion, no real acknowledgement of the damage she had done. It was just another smug response, like this was all some game she had been waiting for me to finish. My father took the confirmation much harder. When I showed him the results, he collapsed into a kitchen chair, head in his hands, breathing heavily as if the weight of years of suspicion had finally crashed down on him all at once. Through strained words, he admitted that deep down, he had always feared this was the truth, but had never wanted to face it. For 32 years, he had raised me as his son. He had changed my diapers, taught me to ride a bike, helped me with homework, and celebrated every milestone of my life. Finding out now, after all this time, that we weren't biologically related was devastating for him. I thought my extended family would finally see reason after this irrefutable evidence, but I was wrong again. When I told them about the paternity test results, their reactions were mixed and maddening. Some family members flat out refused to acknowledge the truth, saying it wasn't worth breaking the family apart over ancient history. Others looked uncertain, hesitant to choose a side in what had become a deeply divisive family schism. I started seriously considering cutting my mother off for good. There was nothing left to say, no explanation that could justify what she had done. As I turned to leave her house that day, determined to never speak to her again, she spoke one last time. "If you think that's the worst secret in this family, you have no idea," she said, her voice dripping with smug satisfaction. It was clearly a taunt, a hook designed to pull me back into her web of manipulation. I didn't respond. I walked out the door, trying to convince myself that her words were just another manipulation tactic, another way to maintain control. But I couldn't help wondering what other lies might be lurking in our family's past. After everything that had happened, I cut off all contact with my mother. Her last remark about bigger secrets felt like a taunt, like she wanted me to keep digging. I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. I blocked her number, unfollowed her on every social media platform, and told the rest of the family I wanted nothing to do with her anymore. But escaping my mother's influence wasn't that simple. Soon, I started receiving messages from unknown numbers and fake social media accounts. It was clear she wasn't done trying to get to me, wasn't ready to relinquish her control over my life. My father, meanwhile, was falling apart. He packed a bag and left the house, saying he needed space to process everything. He didn't tell me where he was going, but I could tell by the hollow look in his eyes that he was breaking down under the weight of it all. The affair, the paternity test, the years of being lied to. His entire marriage had been built on something he never truly understood, a foundation of deception that had finally crumbled beneath him. At the same time, my mother wasted no time turning the rest of the family against me. I noticed I was hearing from relatives less and less. When I finally asked one of my cousins why everyone was so distant, he reluctantly admitted that my mother had been telling everyone I was mentally unstable and making up stories to hurt her. Some people didn't believe her poisonous lies, but many did. It was easier for them to think I was the problem than to admit that she had been lying to them for years, manipulating them, just as she had manipulated me. Just when I thought things couldn't get any more complicated, my great-aunt reached out to me. She had always kept her distance from my mother, and now I was beginning to understand why. She asked to meet, saying she had information that might help me make sense of everything. We met at a quiet cafe downtown. The moment I sat down across from her, she slid an old photograph across the table without a word. It showed my mother when she was younger, standing next to a man I didn't recognize. There was something intimate about the way they stood together, their bodies angled toward each other, smiles that suggested a shared secret. My great-aunt explained that before my mother married my father, she had been engaged to someone else. This relationship had ended suddenly and without explanation. Shortly after, my mother met my father, and within a year, they were married. But there was a strange gap in the timeline, an entire year between these relationships where no one in the family really knew what my mother had been doing. She had stopped showing up to family gatherings, called home less frequently, and seemed to withdraw from everyone she knew. When she finally reappeared and introduced them to my father, she never mentioned her ex-fiancé again. It was as if that entire chapter of her life had been erased. This new information sent me digging deeper into my mother's past. I found an old high school yearbook with my mother's senior photo, and on the same page was the man from the photograph. Frustratingly, his name wasn't listed, but it gave me a lead to follow. After extensive online searching, I found a possible name, Greg Wilson. I also managed to track down an old address from years ago, though I had no idea if it would still be valid after all this time. When my father returned from his self-imposed exile, he looked worn down but somehow different. More resolved, perhaps. He told me he had been thinking a lot about everything that had happened, and that he wanted to know the truth as much as I did. To my surprise, he started helping me search for more information about my mother's past and this mysterious Greg Wilson. One night, as I was heading to bed, my younger brother stopped me in the hallway. He had remained strangely quiet throughout this entire ordeal, never picking a side, never asking questions. But now he just looked at me for a long, uncomfortable moment before finally speaking. "She always treated you differently," he said, echoing what he'd mentioned before. When I asked him what he meant, he hesitated, conflict evident in his expression. Then he shook his head as if deciding against elaborating further. "You'll figure it out," he muttered cryptically before walking away, leaving me with yet another frustrating puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. A few days later, I received a voicemail from my mother. I almost deleted it without listening, but curiosity got the better of me. Her voice was calm, almost amused, which only made her message more chilling. "You do not want to go down this road," she said, and that was all. No explanation, no context, just a clear warning to stop digging into her past. I didn't respond. I wasn't going to let her scare me into stopping my search for the truth. If anything, her warning only convinced me that I was getting close to something important. Then, we had a breakthrough. My father managed to track down an old friend from high school who still lived in the area. When he asked about my mother's ex, the man didn't hesitate to provide the confirmation we needed. "Greg Wilson," he said immediately. "They were inseparable back in the day. Then one day he was just gone." A quick search with this confirmed name led me to more details. Greg Wilson was still alive and living in another state, just a few hours' drive away. I sat staring at his name on my computer screen, debating what to do next. What if he had no idea who I was? What if he didn't want to talk to me? Or worse, what if he knew exactly why my mother had been lying all these years? After much deliberation, I found an old email address for Greg linked to a classmate's reunion page. With my heart pounding, I drafted a careful message explaining who I was and why I was contacting him. I didn't accuse anyone of anything or make assumptions. I simply laid out the facts as I knew them and asked if he would be willing to speak with me. A few days later, he replied. The moment I saw his name in my inbox, my stomach turned with nervous anticipation. Whatever was in that email could change everything. Again. I opened the email from Greg with shaking hands, uncertain of what I'd find inside. The message was brief but direct, and the first line sent a chill through me. "I have been waiting for you to find me." Greg's email explained that he and my mother had indeed been engaged once. But one day, without any warning, she had disappeared completely from his life. No goodbye, no explanation. She was simply gone. He had searched for her, even contacted her family, but they had refused to tell him anything about her sudden disappearance. A few months later, he had heard through mutual friends that she had married someone else. My father. Based on the timeline, Greg wrote that he had suspected she was pregnant when she left him, but he had never received confirmation. He admitted that he had spent years wondering if he had a child out there somewhere, a question that had haunted him for decades. My father read the email beside me, his expression unreadable as he processed this new information. The silence between us stretched on, heavy with implications, before he finally spoke. This changed everything. If what Greg had written was true, then he, not my father, could be my biological father. Before I could even begin to process that possibility, my phone started buzzing with incoming calls. It was my mother, but not from her usual number. It was an unknown number. Then another call came in, and another after that. Voicemails began piling up. The first few were calm, almost casual, as if she was trying to act like nothing was wrong. But as they continued, her tone became increasingly frantic, each message more desperate than the last. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I focused on the phone number Greg had included at the bottom of his email. After some hesitation, I dialed it, not knowing what to expect but feeling that I needed answers only he could provide. To my surprise, he picked up immediately. "I thought you might call sooner," he said, his voice steady and calm. "We arranged to meet the next day. My father insisted on coming with me, and we chose a public place, a quiet cafe that seemed like neutral ground for such a momentous meeting. When we walked in, a man sitting by the window stood up instantly. He was older, but still had a sharpness to him, a presence that made it clear he had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Greg got straight to the point once we were seated. He told us he had loved my mother once, but she had always been difficult to understand. She had a way of twisting reality, making people believe whatever version of events suited her at the time. Back then, it had seemed like relatively harmless behavior, changing small details in stories, exaggerating events to make them more interesting, but it had never seemed malicious or concerning. Until she left without a word, disappearing from his life completely. Then he pulled out a small stack of papers from a folder. Old letters, yellowed with age. They were love letters, all from my mother, all written around the time I would have been conceived. Reading them left no question that they had been together during that period. The dates, the references to their shared experiences, the intimate details, it all aligned perfectly with the timeline of my conception. Greg offered to take a DNA test to confirm what now seemed increasingly likely, that he was my biological father. I agreed immediately, desperate for the certainty of scientific proof after so many lies. That night, while we were waiting for the test to be arranged, my mother showed up uninvited at my father's house. She was already worked up when she arrived, her eyes wide and her words coming fast, like she was barely holding herself together. She demanded that we stop this nonsense, insisting that we were digging up things that didn't need to be dug up. For the first time in our marriage, I saw my father truly lose his composure. Years of pent-up frustration and betrayal came pouring out as he told her that after everything, the lies, the humiliation, the complete betrayal of trust, he was done. He wanted her out of his life for good. She looked at him for a long moment, then at me, then back at him. And then, in a gesture that sent ice through my veins, she just smiled. It was a small, knowing smile, like she still had some secret that no one else knew, some final card she had yet to play. When I confronted her one last time, demanding an explanation for all the pain she had caused, she wouldn't provide one. No reasons, no apologies, just one last cryptic remark. It was for your own good. That was all she said before walking away, leaving me with more questions than answers. And so I waited for the DNA results, knowing that whatever they revealed, my life would never be the same again. The foundation of my identity had been completely upended, but there was one thing I knew for certain. The truth, however painful, was preferable to living with lies. The DNA results finally arrived. I decided to open them alone, wanting a private moment to process whatever truth they revealed. My hands were steady as I broke the seal on the envelope, but my mind was completely blank, as if it had shut down to protect me from what I might discover. The answer was right there in black and white, undeniable and life-changing. Greg Wilson was my biological father. I sat there for a long time, staring at the paper, letting the reality of it sink in. I had spent my entire life believing one thing, only to have it ripped away in a matter of weeks. My identity, my understanding of my family, my sense of self, all of it had been built on a foundation of lies. But strangely, the person I thought about most in that moment wasn't myself. It was my father, the man who had raised me, who had been there for every milestone, every triumph, every struggle throughout my life. When I finally gathered the courage to tell him the results, he didn't react right away. He just nodded, took a deep breath, and looked away. His entire body tensed, as if he was physically holding something back. Anger, perhaps, or grief. Then, without a word, he stood up and left the room. I didn't follow him. I knew he needed space to process this confirmation of what we had both suspected, but hoped wasn't true. Hours passed before he finally returned and spoke. He admitted that deep down, he had already known. He had spent years ignoring the doubts, convincing himself that the timelines worked, that my mother wouldn't lie about something so fundamentally important. But now that the truth was laid bare before him, there was no more running from it. He was devastated, and watching his pain was almost worse than dealing with my own confusion and anger. My mother, on the other hand, barely reacted when I confronted her with the results. She didn't seem surprised, didn't even try to deny it. She just scoffed, as if this earth-shattering revelation was somehow irrelevant, and dismissed the whole thing as unimportant. According to her, I was wasting my time chasing answers that didn't matter. Her callous disregard for how her lies had affected everyone around her was stunning. The family's response to the news was split down the middle. Some relatives still refused to believe she would lie about something so significant, clinging to the version of her they wanted to believe in. Others started questioning everything about her, realizing that if she could keep a secret this massive for nearly 3 decades, there was no telling what else she might have lied about over the years. Her carefully cultivated reputation started to crack. It was subtle at first. Family members weren't as quick to defend her. Whispers started circulating at gatherings, and old stories were being re-examined in light of this new understanding of her character. But it wasn't enough to make her stop her manipulative behavior or take responsibility for her actions. My father made his decision soon after the DNA test confirmed Greg was my biological father. He filed for divorce, stating that he had spent too many years being lied to, manipulated, and made to feel like he was crazy for having doubts about her truthfulness. He was done with the gaslighting and emotional abuse. He cut her out of his life completely, refusing to engage with her any further. That's when she made her final attempt to manipulate me. A letter arrived in the mail, written in her careful handwriting. In it, she blamed me for ruining the family and turning people against her. She called me ungrateful and declared she would never forgive me for what I had done. The entire letter was focused on her feelings, her perceived victimhood. There was no apology, no explanation for why she had lied all these years, just self-pity and blame-shifting. I didn't respond. I blocked her on every platform, determined to have no more contact with her. No more voicemails, no more cryptic remarks, no more manipulation. I was done. Meanwhile, my father started looking into legal options. He wasn't sure if there was anything he could do after all these years, but he wanted to try. Even if nothing came of it legally, it was about holding her accountable, about standing up for himself after decades of deception. My mother, finding herself increasingly isolated, took her grievances to social media. She posted about how her ungrateful son had betrayed her, how she had sacrificed everything for me, how I had chosen to believe lies over my own mother. The comments section quickly filled with sympathetic responses from people who only knew her carefully edited version of events. They assured her she was a wonderful mother and that I would regret my actions someday. But not everyone was so easily convinced. Some people asked questions, some mentioned other instances where she had been caught in lies. The cracks in her carefully crafted public image were growing larger, and there was nothing she could do to repair them. In the midst of all this family chaos, Greg reached out to me again. Unlike my mother, he didn't pressure me or make demands. He simply said that he would like to get to know me if I was willing. There was a gentleness to his approach that stood in stark contrast to my mother's manipulative tactics. I agreed to meet him, curious about the man who had unknowingly contributed to my existence. We sat down for a long conversation at a quiet restaurant near his hotel. What struck me most was how he didn't try to force a father-son connection right away. He didn't act like we could make up for lost time overnight, or pretend that 32 years of absence could be erased with a single meeting. Instead, he just listened. He answered my questions honestly and let me set the pace for our interactions. It was strange to sit across from this man who had once searched for me, but never had the chance to find me. My father, my biological father, a stranger with whom I shared DNA but no memories. Despite the bizarre circumstances, there was something refreshingly straightforward about Greg. He didn't manipulate or evade difficult questions. He simply told the truth as he knew it, a trait that I found increasingly valuable after decades of my mother's lies. Meanwhile, the man who raised me, the father of my heart if not my blood, reassured me that nothing had changed between us. "I raised you," he told me, his voice firm and unwavering. "You will always be my son." Those simple words meant everything to me. Biology didn't erase 32 years of love and care. My world had been completely shattered by my mother's lies. But for the first time, I felt like I finally knew the truth. And for the first time, I felt like I could start over, building relationships based on honesty rather than deception. Of course, the silence from my mother didn't last long. She had lost direct access to me through blocking, but she wasn't done trying to manipulate the situation to her advantage. She started reaching out to other family members, spinning a new version of the story where I had turned the family against her and was trying to erase her from my life. She made it sound like I had been poisoned against her, like I was brainwashed into cutting her off. Then came the fake crisis. She started telling people she was having a breakdown because of me, garnering sympathy and concern from relatives who didn't know any better. Some family members started calling me, suddenly worried about her mental state. A few even had the audacity to tell me that regardless of what had happened, she was still my mother, and I should at least hear her out for the sake of family harmony. Others were more direct in their guilt-tripping, telling me I had broken her heart and that I needed to fix things before it was too late. Their well-meaning but misguided concern only reinforced my decision to keep my distance. My father, despite everything, struggled with his own guilt. He knew what she had done, knew how deeply and consistently she had lied throughout their marriage. But decades of emotional entanglement weren't easy to shake off. He admitted that part of him still felt responsible for her well-being, even though she had manipulated him for years. He wasn't considering going back to her. That bridge was thoroughly burned. But I could see the weight of it all in the slump of his shoulders and the new lines around his eyes. Then, something unexpected happened. Greg, my biological father, called me with troubling news. My mother had contacted him out of nowhere, sending him a hostile message telling him to stay out of her business and to stop interfering in my life. He had ignored her attempt at intimidation, making it clear to me that he wasn't going anywhere and that she didn't get to control this relationship. Meanwhile, my younger brother, who had stayed mostly neutral throughout this family drama, finally admitted that he didn't know what to believe anymore. He wasn't defending our mother outright, but he also wasn't fully ready to accept the harsh reality of who she truly was. I didn't push him to choose sides. He would have to come to terms with the truth in his own time, at his own pace. The division in the family continued to widen. Some relatives doubled down on their support of my mother, convinced she was just a misunderstood woman who had made mistakes but didn't deserve such harsh judgment. Others saw her for what she really was, a pathological liar who had caused immeasurable harm, and cut ties with her completely. My mother made one last attempt to get to me through email. It was short, vague, and carefully worded to avoid any actual admission of wrongdoing. She claimed she had only lied to protect me, but wouldn't explain what that meant or what she was supposedly protecting me from. There was no genuine apology, no real acknowledgement of the damage she had caused, just another attempt to control the narrative and make herself the hero of a story where she was clearly the villain. I didn't respond. I had nothing left to say to her. My father and I started discussing legal options. At this point, it wasn't just about the past. It was about stopping her from continuing to interfere in our lives. I wasn't sure if there was anything we could actually do from a legal standpoint, but I knew we had to try something to protect ourselves from her ongoing manipulation. Then, I heard about what happened at a recent family gathering that I had deliberately skipped. My mother had caused a scene, standing up in the middle of a conversation and starting to cry loudly about how she had lost her son. She went on, telling anyone who would listen that I had abandoned her and how devastated she was by my betrayal. Some people comforted her, while others awkwardly looked away, clearly uncomfortable with her public display of self-pity. I wasn't there to witness this performance, but word spread quickly through the family grapevine. It was just another attempt to paint herself as the victim, rather than taking responsibility for her actions. Just when I thought I had uncovered all of my mother's secrets, I received a message that caught me completely off guard. It came from someone on Greg's side of the family, a relative I never knew I had. They explained that they had known about me for years. My mother had made sure they never reached out, telling them I was better off not knowing, and that I was being raised properly by my father. They had respected her wishes at the time, not wanting to interfere with what they believed was a stable family situation. But now that everything had come out into the open, they wanted to meet me and welcome me into their family. It was overwhelming to discover that I had an entire branch of relatives who had known about my existence, while I remained completely unaware of theirs. I told my father about this new development, unsure of how he would react. He thought for a long time before finally saying, "You deserve to know them." Despite the pain this situation had caused him, he was still putting my well-being first, still being the father he had always been to me. Then he did something I never thought he would do. He called my mother one last time. I didn't hear the conversation, but it was brief. When it was over, he told me he had informed her in no uncertain terms to never contact him again. Then he blocked her permanently on every possible communication channel. I followed his lead, making sure I had blocked her on everything. No more emails, no more voicemails from random numbers, no more secondhand manipulation through well-meaning relatives. For the first time in my life, I felt truly free from her control, free from the constant anxiety of wondering what new lie she might tell, or what drama she might create next. I started therapy soon after, feeling it was the only way to make sense of the years of emotional manipulation I had endured. At first, I wasn't sure what to expect from these sessions. I had spent so much time focused on uncovering the truth about my parentage that I hadn't really processed the deeper psychological damage my mother's lifelong deception had caused. But the more I talked with my therapist, the more I realized how profoundly her lies had shaped every aspect of my life. My relationships, my self-image, my ability to trust others. It was both painful and liberating to recognize these patterns and begin the work of undoing them. Meanwhile, my relationship with my father only grew stronger through this ordeal. The DNA test had changed nothing between us in terms of our emotional bond. If anything, it had brought us closer together, united by our shared experience of my mother's manipulation. He was the one who had been there through everything. Every scrape, every school event, every major and minor moment of my life. Biology didn't change that fundamental reality. He was my real father in every way that mattered. Greg and I started meeting more frequently. There were no grand emotional reunions or forced moments of connection, just two people gradually getting to know each other. He didn't push me or try to make up for lost time overnight. He simply made it clear that he was there, that if I wanted to build a relationship, he was ready for it, but he would respect whatever boundaries I needed to set. Then came the meeting with the rest of Greg's family, my biological relatives who I had never known existed. I had no idea what to expect when I agreed to meet them. Would they resent me for appearing in their lives so suddenly? Would they feel obligated to welcome me out of a sense of duty rather than genuine interest? To my surprise, they welcomed me immediately with open arms and sincere warmth. They explained that they had known about me for years and had wanted to reach out many times, but had been blocked by my mother's insistence that I shouldn't know about them. Now that the truth was out, they wasted no time making me feel like I belonged with them. It was overwhelming in the best way possible to suddenly have this whole new branch of family who shared my features, my mannerisms, even some of my interests. I could see little pieces of myself reflected in their faces, their gestures, their laughter. It was a strange feeling after a lifetime of not quite feeling like I fit in with my mother's side of the family. But my mother wasn't done with her machinations yet. I started hearing from distant relatives, people I barely spoke to under normal circumstances, telling me that my mother was still pushing the narrative that I was mentally unstable and had been brainwashed against her. She was playing the victim, spinning her usual web of lies, hoping to win people back to her side. Her tactics weren't working this time, though. More and more family members started cutting ties with her as they saw through her manipulations. Some had already distanced themselves over the years, but now even the ones who had defended her most loyally were backing away. Her reputation was crumbling under the weight of her own lies, which had become too big and too tangled to maintain anymore. Her downfall became official when my father's divorce was finalized. He called me after the proceedings were complete and simply said, "Best decision of my life." There was no anger in his voice, just pure relief at finally being free from decades of manipulation and lies. That was the moment I finally understood with complete clarity. My mother was never going to change. I would never get an apology or explanation from her. There would never be some big moment of clarity where she admitted what she had done and took responsibility for the pain she had caused. And strangely enough, I found that I was okay with that realization. Greg gave me a piece of advice that stuck with me during this difficult time. He told me that I didn't need my mother's validation to move forward with my life. Waiting for an apology from someone like her was a waste of time and emotional energy. My peace didn't have to depend on her acknowledgement of guilt or her unlikely redemption. Things at work started improving too as I put more distance between myself and my mother's drama. I received a promotion I had been working toward for years, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control of my own life rather than being caught in the undertow of my mother's constant lies and manipulations. Then I made one final decision that felt like the last step in reclaiming my life. I cut out the family members who still defended her, the ones who called telling me to just let it go, or tried to guilt me into reconciling with her for the sake of the family. If they couldn't see the damage she had caused, or worse, if they saw it but expected me to endure more of it, then they weren't people I needed in my life. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, I felt a genuine sense of peace. There were no more secrets hanging over my head, no more manipulation to navigate, nothing left for my mother to hold over me. I knew exactly who I was and where I came from. The truth had been painful to uncover, but living with it was infinitely better than living with lies. Looking back, I realized something important. Walking away from toxic family members isn't easy. Society constantly reinforces the idea that family relationships should be preserved at all costs. But sometimes it's the healthiest choice you can make for yourself. Sometimes it's the only way to break cycles of manipulation and abuse that have persisted for generations. Just when I thought the drama might finally be subsiding, an anonymous letter arrived in the mail. There was no return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. It was from my mother. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I let it sit on my kitchen counter for a while, staring at it and debating whether it was even worth my time to read whatever new manipulation she had crafted. Finally, curiosity got the better of me. I unfolded the letter carefully and began scanning the first few lines. She warned me that I would regret cutting her off, that no one else truly understood me the way she did, that she had always done what was best for me, even if I couldn't see it yet. The letter was filled with the same self-serving justifications and thinly veiled threats that had characterized our relationship for years. I didn't even finish reading it. I tossed it straight into the trash, realizing that nothing she could say would change my mind or pull me back into her toxic orbit. She had lost her power over me, and we both knew it. She must have realized that her words no longer held any sway over me, because days later, she had another public meltdown online. She posted a dramatic rant about losing her only son, claiming she had been a devoted mother who had been cruelly abandoned. She talked about how she had sacrificed everything for me, how I had been turned against her, and how she would always love me no matter what. But this time, her performance didn't go as planned. For the first time, people started openly questioning her version of events. Some family members, the same ones who had blindly defended her for years, finally started asking why she kept changing her story. They pointed out the inconsistencies in her accounts, the way her version of events kept shifting to portray her in the most sympathetic light possible. A few even commented publicly that maybe I had good reason to cut her off. The cracks in her perfect victim narrative were getting wider, and there was nothing she could do to repair them. Her carefully constructed image was crumbling before her eyes. Then an old friend reached out to me, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. He told me that even back when we were kids, he had always thought my mother was controlling. He said she had a way of making everything about her, of twisting situations to center herself. He told me he wasn't surprised by how things had turned out, that he had seen the signs of her manipulative behavior even when we were children. It was strange hearing this perspective from someone outside my family, someone who had observed our dynamic years ago, but hadn't been caught up in the emotional manipulation. But it was also validating, confirmation that I wasn't crazy or ungrateful, that others had seen through my mother's facade long before I could. Greg, my biological father, continued to be a steady, supportive presence in my life. He never pressured me or made demands, content to follow my lead in building our relationship. I could tell he was still adjusting to the idea of having a son he never knew existed for over 3 decades, but he made it clear that I wasn't alone in navigating this strange new reality. Then my father, the man who had raised me, who had been there for every skinned knee and school play, told me something I never expected to hear. He said he was proud of me, proud that I had broken the cycle of manipulation, that I had stood up for myself despite the immense pressure to maintain the status quo. He said that no matter what happened, I would always be his son. That was the only thing that would never change, regardless of DNA or biology. I maintained my no-contact policy with my mother rigorously. No emails, no texts, no updates through relatives. Nothing. For the first time in my life, she was truly gone from my daily existence, and the freedom was exhilarating. Therapy continued to be immensely helpful. I realized that thoughts of my mother no longer triggered the same intense emotional responses they once had. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad about the situation. She was just someone I used to know, a person who had shaped my life in the worst ways, but no longer had any control over me or my happiness. I focused on my well-being, setting firm boundaries and actually sticking to them for perhaps the first time in my life. The extended family finally stopped bringing her up around me. They knew I wouldn't entertain conversations about her anymore. She was no longer my problem or my responsibility. One evening, as I sat at dinner with both Greg and my father, a sight that would have seemed impossible just months earlier, I had a moment of profound clarity. I realized that I didn't miss my mother. Not really. What I missed was the idea of what she could have been, the mother she should have been. But the reality was that she had never been that person. And for the first time, I was completely okay with that realization. I had lost my mother, but I had gained something far more valuable: the truth, a real family built on honesty rather than manipulation, and most of all, freedom from the web of lies that had entangled me my entire life.